going to start and we're going to create a really fun texturized background. That's what I want to show you today, is how to create some really interest in your background but keep it exactly there in the background. And I like to create texture physically, but today we're going to give the illusion of texture, and it's not going to be actually three-dimensional, and we're going to be using stencils and stamps and doing lots of fun things. But I wanted to tell you I started with a wood canvas. It's 12 inches by, I believe this is 2 inches wide. And I've come in and I've base coated it, and I created a mixture of 4 Wedgwood blues with 1 black, and that gave me a very, very cool dark gray looking color. Now, for your home decor, if you want to lean more gray, that's fine. My home decor, I like to have a little bit more blue. So when I come in with Wedgwood blue, if you want to come in with a medium gray color, that's fine. You could base coat this black and just come in with grays on top of it also. The one stencil and stamp set that I'm going to be using is by Stampendous, and this is their Cling Grunge script. But what's really important is when you open it up, don't throw this away. Most people think that this is just clear Mylar. But other than the stamps, you have this really neat stencil. And I just love this pattern, and what I like about it is I can repeat it over and over again because it's going to line up, and I'm going to show you how to do that. I could use a stencil brush to put this in, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a sponge because I don't want a smooth application. I'm trying to create texture. And I'm going to start with some Wedgwood blue. And I'm going to load my sponge in it. So when I load my sponge in it, there's a whole bunch of paint on here. What I want to do is offload it. So when I offload it, I really work the paint into the sponge. So you can see that it's not gloppy anymore, and that you can see the actual texture. And this is called a sea wool sponge. And these are available at craft stores everywhere. So then what I'm going to do is make sure that I keep this lined up and square. You could tape this down to make sure you do that. And I'm going to just lightly pounce over this. So while I'm using the stencil, and it will create a pattern, it will not necessarily be a nice crisp pattern because I'm looking for something old and aged looking. So you can see the pattern, but it's definitely a little bit unique in the fact that I used the sponge. And this is just a really fun technique to use. So I'm lining back up, and I'm not reloading my sponge. I'm going to just keep pouncing. And I'm going to do this until the entire background has been covered with this pattern. Okay, it's all done, and this is the pattern I got. It's a little bit uneven, but that's fine. Now, what I want to do is I want to make it just even less of a pattern, because you can see that's all nice and even. And I don't necessarily want to have this particular pattern there. What I want is I just want texture in the background. So I'm going to take the same sponge and the Wedgwood blue, and I'm very lightly just going over the whole thing. And this is just going to make it look a little bit more subtle so that you can barely see that there's any kind of patterning in there. So that way, if your stencil didn't turn out perfect, you're not going to be able to see that either. So I didn't even reload my sponge. It's just got the Wedgwood blue from my last application of paint. And so it's just making this a little bit softer, a little bit more subtle, giving me a tone-on-tone pattern. It's really important that you rinse out your sponge as soon as you are done with this process. So what I want to do is check and make sure that I've got enough sponging everywhere I want. I know the pumpkin's going to go in here. So I'm really going to look around the outside edges here, make sure that I've got it. Now if I wanted to, I could also then, while I've got the paint out, go ahead and very lightly bring the sponging here. You could also stencil it. But since I think most people are not going to look at the sides, just putting a random pattern around the sides will be fine with the sponging. Now, I didn't point out in the beginning that if you do not know how to base coat a wooden surface, that you can go to my one video that I have all about how to base coat. Now what I want to do is I want to mess this up a little bit more. And I'm going to get a big brush. And I like to use an old brush. I like to use an old brush because I'm going to be dry brushing with this. And we're going to just be pulling black paint on. And so I've got an old brush and we're going to load it. I'm going to load the paint into the brush. I've really pushed it into the brush. And then I'm going to just come over here and wipe it out, and we're going to just drag it a little bit over on the sides. We're going to have, it's going to be a little bit random. We want a variation, and this is a dry brush effect. Now it sounds probably like I'm hitting it really hard, but I'm not. As my paint runs out, then I will push a little bit harder and try to drag it in. I love that Stampendous has these stencils in their kits because then you can just do such interesting textures and create such a variety of patterns and create interest in the backgrounds for your painting, all with the cost of one stamp set. So every time I load it, my brush is still dry. I always come back to my paper towel. Now as I'm dragging it here, I will also drag it on the sides, but for the purpose of time, I'm not going to do that. And I want a little bit more of this in the corner. This takes time to build up, and that's okay. This will be worth it in the end. I like when I lay my brush down because there's just a little bit of wood grain texture showing, and it's picking up some of that, and I like that really well. I really want these corners to be nice and dark. And see how it's kind of just fading it into here. This texture is not really obvious. And that's exactly what we want. So at first I went to the side, and now I'm going to come vertically and run my paint over it vertically. I might create some texture that way too. Never know. Now what you should do periodically is tip your surface so that you can really see it and make sure that it's balanced all the way around it. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to do what's called side loading with the same brush. I'm going to rinse it out. So I'm loading just the side of the brush and I have water in, and I'm going to just bring this down along the side so the paint portion that I have corner loaded is on the outside edge. So this is called floating or side loading because I just loaded a portion or a corner or the side of the brush. And then the water is on the inside and the paint's on the outside. And this is just going to fade away, but I'm going to use some water just in case I have an edge on there. This is just water. I'm going to just fade this away. Okay, so that's already looking just a little bit aged. I'm going to let this dry and we'll be back. So I have the text stamp and a clear, clean handle, acrylic handle, and I'm going to put this on here. Now, most everyone assumes that you have to have inks to stamp with, but I always used bottled acrylic paints, and so I'm going to just use the DecoArt Lamp Black. And I'm going to use a mushroom sponge because it's my favorite way to add paint onto the stamps. But if you don't have them, what's really important is you want to have something that's a high density. I see people using the makeup sponges, and sometimes those are not do not have a high density to them, and you really want something that's going to hold up to the pouncing. So you can get these sponges at Dollar Tree, and they're also a very similar consistency, and it's in the automotive section, and I just cut them up and then I can use them too. But I prefer to use these sponges, and these are made by Plaid. I do believe they're in the Martha Stewart line, and you can find them in the craft stores. So I'm going to come in, and the key is you want to make sure that you really load the paint into your sponge. So you can see that when you look at it, there's not a glob of paint on it. It almost looks like a stamp pad. So then I can come in and I can load this. And I work fairly quickly. And yes, I am really pressing hard. And then I'm going to come in and randomly put this around. This is going to create some more texture. I'm using black, and it's coming right off of the area that I just loaded with black. Maybe I'll put a little bit over here. I'm just trying to create a little bit more texture. So now I'm going to just take and keep stamping, and I'm not reloading, just creating some subtle texture. So this whole stamped or stenciled area in the background is really going to remain in the background. As soon as I'm done with this, I clean my stamp. You can use a handy wipe. A lot of times if I'm super busy, I will have a tub of hot soapy water, and I'll swish them around in there really quick to try to get the paint off of it. But if for some reason your paint dries on your stamp, just spritz it with a little bit of rubbing alcohol, and if you can't find rubbing alcohol, use hand sanitizer. Now I have a larger clear acrylic handle that I'm using for the scroll, and I want to make sure I put it on straight. One thing I want to say is it's always best to load your stamps in the middle of the acrylic handle. And you can see I have some paint on mine. I should really clean these really good, but I left that on to remind me to tell you that if for some reason your stamp does not stick to the acrylic handle, it's because your acrylic handle is dirty and or your stamp's dirty, and I just take a little time to clean it off. So now I'm going to go back into this color, which was Wedgwood Blue, and I'm going to load this really quick, and I'm using the other end of the sponge. And what I do is I just press evenly and lift. And you get a nice clean stamp that way. Now I'm going to reverse this and bring it over. And we'll let part of it go off to the side. And we'll put it right there. And again, I don't rock it, I press evenly. And then I lift. That's pretty good. Now if you don't like that area, what you can do is come in and just add a little bit right there. We're going to do the same thing over here. To add a little bit more up over here to kind of join them together. So you can add just parts of a stencil too, so you can see how I just fill that in. Now my hands are getting all full of black because I'm using the same sponge. I generally would have cleaned this out ahead of time if I wasn't filming this. And then my hands and my handle would not be full of this black color. So ever since I put this color in, you can see how those stamp, little individual stamps that I put in are just creating some texture. The original texture I put in is somewhat in the background. Because I really do want this to just be kind of like a tone-on-tone texture. And I'm going to put this all the way around in the same way, and I'll be back. So now I'm going to take and I'm going to put the Crackle stamp on here, and I just love this Crackle stamp. And this time I'm going to use the original color that we put down where it was 4 parts of Wedgwood blue with 1 part lamp black. It's going to look like a very dark, cool gray. Make sure that your sponge is loaded so it doesn't have too much paint in it. It should look like it's a stamp pad. Then you're going to come in and you're going to pounce over this. You work very quickly. And let's see what we get over here. We should have some nice crackle. And that is just going to be very subtle. See if I raise it up, if I can show you. It's just breaking it up a little bit. It should show up once it dries, and it should be a little bit lighter than the black that I put in there. And again, I'm just trying to break up the scrolls a little bit and make them a little bit messier. You can bring this down over some of the areas where I originally stamped. And then what's going to happen is they're going to just blend in, because this is the original color that I had down. And we're going to just have a lot of fun, tone-on-tone texture. I hope you can see all of this. So what I'm trying to do is just set all of these stamped areas in so it's just not so obvious where they started and stopped. This is a lot of subtle changes. So I want to bring that up. Can you see where all that texture, all that's going on there? It's very subtle. So I've decided to come in and take a little bit of just the straight Wedgwood and use a little bit more of this Crackle and just add a little bit periodically on the patterning, because I really feel as though this background, the stencil background, is showing a little bit too much as a pattern, and I really want it to be more tone on tone. So by coming over with the Crackle on top of it, it's going to break it up a little bit. The whole idea is I'm just trying to create some very subtle interest in the background of my painting. Oh, that looks really nice too. I just put some Crackle in there, so let me do one more. And so I wanted to show you all of the nice textures we've got here. And so I'm going to paint a lovely white pumpkin on here now. And once I'm done, I'll show you what the finished product looks like. So I've been working on the design and I'm really liking what I'm seeing with the pumpkin, but as I'm building the lightness up in the pumpkin, I'm not sure if I really want to add more texture. And this often happens as you're creating the design. Now you can still see we have a lot of texture in there, and I really love the way it is in the background. So I just wanted to tell you some of your options. Is what you could do is you could come in and you could repeat the steps, or you could come in and you could add, let's say, just an individual stencil here of just this part by taping everything off. Then you could put some scrolls on the side. Those would all really be pretty. You could also come in and restamp with the scroll stamp. I have this tried and true, and you can tell how much it's been used just by looking at it. I love the scroll stamp. You could just put parted over there, or you could have some scrolls coming in. But I really like this corner stencil, and I think I'm going to put this in, and I'm going to use the Wedgwood Blue again. And I know it's going to go over some of our scrolls, but remember, this was all just texturized in the background. I really didn't want it to stand out. And I'm thinking that this little scroll really isn't going to show up much if I put this in. So I want to put something a little bit more substantial in. I will dampen my sponge, and I'm going to put it in with the sponge again, because again, I don't want it to be too heavy. And I load my sponge and then offload it. So because of the way that this is shaped, it kind of goes off the edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load from this dot and then down, and then once it dries, we'll come in and do the rest of it. See how that looks. Oh, that looks really nice. Now I know I'm going to put some leaves and some other things around here. I just wanted to show you that sometimes you need to make some adjustments as you go along within a design. And I'll be back and show you the finished project. If you would like the instructions on how to paint the pumpkin and the vines that are part of this design, this pattern packet is on my website and you can purchase it. And I'll have a link below the video so that you can go right there and get it. Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you'll subscribe, and please click on the bell so that you'll be reminded every time I post a video. And until next time, may painting always bring you joy.